When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say. Because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't still exist. But the sea does not forget. It remembers every scream that was swallowed, every breath that was stolen, and every lie that was told under the guise of duty. They told me to wait out the storm. They begged me to anchor the ship. The sky had turned a violent green, the air thick like blood before a wound bursts open. But I couldn't afford to be late. Not again. Not with everything on the line. And so I told them to prepare the vessel, to brace for the wind and the wrath of the Atlantic. And I, their captain, gave the order that condemned them all. That night, the Marrow Gale was devoured whole. 42 men, my brothers, my crew, gone beneath the blackened waves, while I, or what remained of me, watched from the other side of eternity. The living think of ghosts as echoes of tragedy, but they are wrong. We are not echoes. We are regret. We are memories sharpened to a knife's edge. And I am the blade. My name, it hardly matters now, but I was once Captain Elias Carron, son of a fisherman, raised along the mossy coasts of Inverbrachy. I knew the sea like a mother's voice. I trusted her moods. I believed I could tame her. Fools think hubris comes in grand speeches. No, hubris whispers. It sounds like, just this once, just one more trip. We'll be fine. The night we sailed into the storm, the fog rolled in faster than I'd ever seen. It was unnatural, not the thick, lazy kind that drifts in from the sea, but a hungry veil that clung to the rigging and wrapped itself around our throats. The crew felt it too. I saw them glancing at the sky, muttering old prayers in Gaelic, gripping their rosaries until their knuckles went white. But I ignored them. I had a deadline, a shipment that had to reach Blackport by dawn. The client was unforgiving, and I was already drowning in debts I hadn't confessed to anyone, not even Sarah. Sarah, my wife. God forgive me. I remember the first crack of lightning, a jagged bone in the belly of the sky. Then came the wind, shrieking like something ancient had woken from beneath the sea. And then the screaming started. Not the storm, not yet, but my men, one by one. Their voices vanished into the fog. We didn't crash. We didn't sink. We vanished. There's no record of the Marrow Gale reaching Blackport. No wreckage. No survivors. Only sightings. Wild tales from old sailors who claim they saw our masts in the mist, drifting silently along the cliffs. The ghost ship. That's what they call her now. But I know the truth. We weren't cursed by the storm. We were cursed by me. I should have listened to Logan. He was my first mate, my friend since boyhood. He came to me just before we left the dock, eyes sunken, voice low. He told me he'd seen something in the water the night before. Said it watched him. Said it spoke. I laughed. Said he'd been drinking too hard, but he hadn't touched a drop in weeks. He looked at me then, like he was trying to decide whether to tell me something or let me walk into hell blind. In the end, he said just one thing. There are things beneath us, Elias, things that don't want us crossing their waters tonight. I shrugged him off. My pride was louder than his fear. We left the harbor at midnight. I don't remember dying. Not really. It wasn't a moment. It was a bleeding away. 1 second I was gripping the wheel. trying to scream orders over the roaring wind. And the next, silence. No pain, just cold. And then, the stillness. I opened my eyes, but there was no sky, no sea, just gray, endless gray, and voices, not loud, not human, not angry, just disappointed. I tried to move, to scream, to ask what had happened, but my mouth didn't work like it used to. My body was gone, or maybe it had never mattered. I was thought and memory and guilt and horror, bound together in the shape of who I used to be. I tried to find the others. I couldn't. Days, or what passed for them, dragged by. I wandered the fog, the same stretch of sea over and over again, trapped within the echoes of that final voyage. But then I heard it, Logan's voice, distant, cracked. You left us. I ran. Can a ghost run? I don't know. But I moved through the gray like a scream moves through silence. And there they were, my crew, frozen in that moment before the end. Each of them stuck in the last thing they felt. Fear, pain, betrayal. They were not at peace, and I knew why. They couldn't move on because I wouldn't let go. The curse wasn't theirs, it was mine. There was something beneath the sea that night. I don't know what it was. A force, a presence, something ancient and hungry. And I bargained with it, not with words, not consciously, but with my choices. I put profit before people. I chose the deadline over their lives. And the sea took that choice. It took it and twisted it into a pact. Now, the Marrow Gale is its vessel. Not a ship, a prison, a floating mausoleum for 42 souls who deserve better than me. But I'm not telling you this to be pitied. I'm telling you because the ship has returned. They've seen it again. In the fog, off the coast of Blackport, same sails, same figurehead, same silence. I don't know why. Maybe the sea's growing hungry again. Maybe the storm never really ended. But I know this, if that ship comes ashore, it won't be empty. There's still time. Maybe, if I can tell my story, the whole story, if I can make you see us not as legends, not as whispers, but as men, real men who bled and wept and begged, maybe the sea will let them go. Maybe it will take only me. But you must listen. You must hear every word, every truth, every crack in my voice. Because beneath all this salt and sorrow, there is a reason. A man does not become a monster in one night. Sometimes it takes a storm. Sometimes it takes a decision made in desperation. And sometimes it just takes silence. It was a Tuesday when Logan came to me. The fog hadn't rolled in yet, not the kind that clings like wet linen to your skin. But the docks already felt wrong. The gulls were too quiet, the air too still. And Logan, the most loyal man I'd ever known, looked like he hadn't slept in days. He stood by the wheelhouse, hands buried in the pockets of his oilskin coat, eyes fixed not on the harbor, but on the sea. I remember his voice, dry as driftwood and twice as fragile. Elias, he said without turning, something's out there. I laughed. That's the worst part, isn't it? That I laughed. A short, smug huff. Like a man who thinks he's seen it all. Like a man who doesn't believe in ghosts, yet is now telling his story from the other side. He didn't flinch, just slowly turned toward me and said, "It spoke to me last night." I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't or couldn't explain. Not then, not clearly. All he said was this: I heard it humming from the black part of the sea and the dreams. Elias, it was in my dreams, too. I should have known. I did know. Something in my stomach sank, like the tide pulling away before a wave strikes. But pride is louder than instinct. And fear is easier to ignore when it wears the face of a man you've trusted for years. So I did what I had always done. I turned away. Logan didn't press me. He never did. That's why I trusted him. He knew when to speak and when to let silence say the rest. But I saw it, that shadow in his eyes, the kind that forms only when a man stares too long into something he was never meant to see. That night, I found him below deck. He was sitting alone in the cargo hold, where the lanterns couldn't reach the corners. His journal was open on his lap, pages torn, smeared, names scribbled and crossed out, symbols I didn't recognize. He didn't see me watching. He was whispering, not to himself, to something. Something in the shadows. I called his name, and the moment shattered. He blinked up at me like I'd pulled him from underwater. I asked him what he was doing. He shook his head, said he didn't remember, but his hands were trembling, and there was seawater on the floorboards. We hadn't set sail yet. Still, I said nothing. Captain's pride, or maybe cowardice. But now, on this side of death, I replay that moment again and again, like a film loop stretched thin from overuse. What if I'd made him speak? What if I'd asked him what the sea had said? What it promised? Because something had promised him something, and something had listened back. When we finally departed that night, the fog arrived as if on cue, thick, yellow-gray, alive. I could feel it crawling along my spine before the first bell rang. Logan didn't speak during launch. He just stood by the stern, watching the wake behind us vanish into mist. And when the first mate asked for his heading, Logan turned to me, eyes hollow, voice flat, and said, "She's not going to let us turn back." I asked him who he meant. His lips barely moved. The one beneath. I told him to get some rest. He didn't argue, but he never went below deck again. Hours passed. The crew murmured, whispered of strange shapes in the fog. One sailor, Riley, swore he heard a woman singing in the water. Another, Caleb, said his compass spun like mad every time he tried to chart our position. But the strangest thing? We stopped hearing the waves. The sea was flat, still, soundless, as if the Marrow Gale was moving over glass. I tried to explain it. Some trick of pressure, of current, a temperature inversion, perhaps. But truth has a shape, and this had teeth. By midnight, I found Logan standing at the bow, shirt soaked, barefoot, eyes closed. He was humming, not a tune I recognized. No sea shanty or hymn. It was older, wrong. His feet were blistered from the deck salt. His hands were bleeding, clenched so tightly his nails had cut into his palms. He looked ecstatic. I grabbed his shoulders, shook him, yelled. He opened his eyes and smiled. "She wants a sacrifice," he whispered. I felt my blood freeze. "Logan, we're already given. Elias, the moment you said yes to the job, you struck the deal, whether you meant to or not." He turned and walked away. I wanted to follow, to demand he explain, but something stopped me. A sound, low, distant, a knocking from beneath the hull, rhythmic, measured, like someone, or something, was tapping from below. I froze. It continued. One knock, then silence, then two, then three, a pattern, a message. And for the first time since I was a boy, lost in a winter storm, I felt true, bottomless fear. I didn't sleep. None of us did. The crew grew silent, pale, like something was being drained from them. Hope, maybe, or will. Logan was the only one who moved with purpose. He began carving symbols into the wood of the deck. Old sailor wards, he said, ones passed down from shipwreck survivors and men who returned from impossible storms. But none of it worked, because what haunted us was not of this world. It was old, older than our charts, older than names. It lived in the stillness between waves, in the silence between lightning, in the hesitation before a scream, and we had entered its domain. Logan confronted me one last time before the storm hit. He grabbed me by the collar, pulled me to his cabin, and showed me a map. It wasn't one we carried. It was hand-drawn, ink scratched violently across yellowing paper. At the center, an X in a patch of ocean with no landmarks. "Where did you get this?" I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "This is where we are now, and this is where she sleeps." I scoffed. But then he leaned close, voice so quiet it barely touched the air. "She feeds on regret, on guilt. That's why you feel her. Elias, that's why I hear her. You have more to hide than any of us." Then he left, and I, fool that I was, burned the map. We never saw Logan again after the storm hit. Some said he jumped. Some said the sea claimed him first. But I think he was taken, not because he was weak, but because he understood, because he saw what was coming long before I did. And I, blind with duty, deaf with pride, sailed us straight into hell. Now, I walk the decks of the Marrow Gale alone. The others, my crew, flicker in and out like dying candles, trapped in their final moments, locked in the echoes of their own terror. But Logan is nowhere, which means one thing. He might have escaped, or he was chosen. And if that's true, if he's become something more, then perhaps he's the only one who can end this. But time is short. Because the fog is rising again, and the ship is waking, there are deals we signed with ink, and there are those we signed with silence. I didn't sell my soul, if that's what you're thinking. There was no blood on parchment, no horned figure cloaked in shadow offering a bargain. No, the thing I gave away, I gave with a single choice, one made in desperation, one I justified 1,000 times before it finally destroyed me. Let me take you back. 6 days before the voyage, I stood before a banker in Blackport. He was the kind of man who made eye contact like a wolf watching prey, motionless, patient, ready. His name was Malcolm Gray. No family, no past, just a handshake and a ledger so thick it could crush a spine. I had missed 3 payments. Sarah didn't know. The crew didn't know. Hell, I barely knew how it had spiraled so fast. But the ship had bled me dry. Repairs, cargo losses, bribes. You don't stay afloat in these waters by being honest. Gray slid a manila envelope across the table. No words, just figures, calculations. I laughed at first, said I'd make the money, said I had a charter coming in. Then he leaned forward and said, "This isn't about money anymore. Captain Carron, this is about time." I remember those words. I remember the smell of his cologne, sharp, cloying, like lilac crushed in vinegar. I remember the way his smile never touched his eyes. "You'll take the shipment," he said. "You'll leave Tuesday night. No delay." I told him the forecast showed storms, gale force winds, unpredictable fog systems. We needed at least a day's wait. He didn't blink. "Or I call in the debt, and by dawn, your ship belongs to me." That's when I made the pact. I nodded. I shook his hand. And in that moment, I gave the Marrow Gale away. Not physically, not in the eyes of the law, but in that gesture, I relinquished something deeper. Command, control, responsibility. Not to a man, but to something watching us through him. It's clearer now. Looking back from death's shores, Gray wasn't just a collector, he was a conduit. And when I agreed to his terms, Something ancient listened. Something that had been waiting for a captain just desperate enough, just blind enough, to offer up his crew like meat on a hook. I don't know if Gray knew who or what he served, but the way his eyes flickered as we parted, it wasn't natural. There was something inside him, something that smiled through his skin. 2 nights before we sailed, I woke up gasping. Salt filled my lungs, though my bed was dry. I felt weightless, suspended in ink-black water, lungs burning, and just before I could scream, I heard her, a voice, feminine, but not human. "You have offered them." I bolted upright in bed. The lamp was still burning, the window open. No breeze, just the slow hiss of the tide, even though my house was miles from the shore. The next morning, I checked my hands. They smelled of brine, and there were scratches, deep, red, across my palms, as though something had clawed me in my sleep, or as if I had been gripping iron too tightly while drowning. I didn't tell Sarah. She already worried enough. I told myself it was stress, nerves, nightmares, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. I had accepted something I couldn't return. The day of departure, I gave the crew their usual speech. Short, sharp, encouraging. I looked every man in the eye, smiled, patted backs. I lied to all of them. That afternoon, I sat alone on the dock before boarding. The seagulls didn't cry. The ropes didn't creak. The world felt like it had paused, like everything held its breath. And then I saw her, a woman, standing at the far end of the pier. Long black coat. No face I could make out, just the vague impression of a mouth not quite closed. She lifted her hand, not to wave, to point at me. Then, talking without a sound, she stepped backward into the sea and vanished. The fog began to rise 30 minutes later. Now, in this limbo, I believe that was the moment the sea accepted the offering. When the fog returned after we left port, it wasn't natural. It obeyed. It curled around our mast like a serpent. It swallowed our compass. It muffled our screams before they were even spoken. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with silence, a dead, humming silence. And in that stillness, I felt it. Eyes, not from above, but beneath, watching, judging, waiting. They came for us one by one, not with claws or teeth, but with despair. Crewmen dropped tools mid-deck and collapsed in sobs. Others wandered off into the fog and were never seen again. And always, just before they disappeared, they whispered the same thing. "She's calling." I began seeing her in reflections, not mine, but hers. Black eyes like wet stone, a smile that stretched wider than it should. The Sea Bride, they called her in old sailors' tales, the widow in the fog, the drowned queen. I had always thought it was folklore, but legends exist for a reason. They are warnings, and I had ignored them all. Now, they won't let me forget. Each night, if you can even call this timeless place night, I feel them. The crew, Logan, the boy we called Red, even old Thomas, who had sailed 40 years without losing faith. They circle the ship like shades, not to punish me, but to wait, because they know something I didn't. The pact I made was never just mine to make. A captain is nothing without his crew, but when he trades their lives for his pride, the sea remembers, and it doesn't forgive, not quickly, not kindly, and not at all, until the debt is repaid. You can only deny madness for so long. At first, I thought it was the ship settling. Wood flexes, metal groans, sails slap in the wind. Any sailor knows the language of a vessel at sea. But what I heard below deck wasn't natural. It started 3 nights after we vanished. That's what I call it now. The vanishing. One moment we were headed toward Blackport, waves beneath us, salt in our teeth. The next, the horizon was gone. No stars, no sun, just endless fog and silence. A silence so thick it felt like cotton stuffed in your ears and your throat. Then the ship began to whisper. It didn't come from the wind. It came from beneath, from inside the hull. At first it was subtle, the faintest creak of syllables buried under plank and nail. You wouldn't believe how fast a whisper becomes a scream in your head when it has nowhere else to go. I pressed my ear to the wall of the captain's quarters. I was sure I'd hear the ocean beyond. Or rats. Maybe. But what I heard was this. You knew. 3 words. Soft. Accusatory. My blood ran cold. I backed away. Told myself it was exhaustion. Isolation. The crew's paranoia seeping into my bones. But deep down, I recognized the voice. It was Caleb. 19, always laughing too loud, the youngest of us. He had died clutching the mast, eyes wide open, mouth locked in a scream I never heard. Now, he whispered through the wood that used to hold his bunk. The next night, I heard another. You watched. This time it was Red. He'd vanished on deck during the second wave of the storm. One moment tying down a sail, the next, gone. Just a boot left behind, still warm, and now, his voice dragged across the beams like a blade. I searched the ship, every room, every hatch. I called out, screamed into the fog. I begged the dead to speak clearly, to come out, to face me. But ghosts don't obey captains. They haunt them. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, not as they were, but as they became. Caleb with seaweed coiled around his throat like hands, Red, jaw unhinged, pointing to the compass spinning wildly in place. Thomas, his eyes stitched shut by salt and guilt, whispering, "You chose this." But the worst wasn't them. It was her. She came in flashes, always just out of focus. A long silhouette, veil soaked in brine, hair tangled with bones. She stood in the cargo hold one night, just stood, still, unmoving. I thought it was a shadow at first, a trick of the lantern, but shadows don't breathe. She did, slow, wet, like the tide heaving through lungs that forgot how to live. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then, she turned her head, not all the way, just enough for me to see her smile. Not warmth, not mockery, satisfaction, as if watching rot take root. After that, I stopped going below deck. I took to pacing the helm alone, hands on the wheel, spinning it pointlessly, just to feel in control of something. Logan used to say the sea had moods. He said when it's calm, it's only pretending, waiting. The fog was like that. It watched me, not just as air. It had form. When I turned too fast, I caught glimpses of limbs in the vapor, faces without eyes, fingers dragging along the railing, disappearing when I blinked. One night, the worst night, I heard a knock on the cabin door. I froze. No one was left. At least, no one with lungs. But the knock came again. Polite, precise, 3 raps. I opened it. Nothing. Just fog. But then I looked down. There, carved into the wooden floor, freshly gouged, were words. You can still give them peace. I stared at those words for hours. What did it mean? How? How could I give peace to the drowned when I was the one who offered them to the depths? The answer came the next night, in the voices. This time they weren't random. They chanted, not loud, not in unison, but overlapping, whisper layered. It was a name, over and over. Carron, Carron, Elias Carron. until it wasn't them anymore, until her voice took over. She didn't say my name like a ghost. She said it like a bride, like a lover. "Captain," she whispered, "you owe me a debt. 42 souls and one truth." My mouth opened. I didn't mean for it to, but it moved. "What truth?" I whispered back. Silence. Then, a rush of sound. Screams, laughter, thunder, wails. And then a single word spat through the madness. "Confess." The ship groaned. Wood split somewhere below. Sails whipped without wind. The sea churned, though we stood still. And I knew, if I didn't speak, if I didn't start unraveling the truth I had buried deeper than any anchor, this ship would become her cathedral, and I, the priest of regret. But confess to what? They knew about the storm, about my pride, about Gray, the banker, about the desperation. That wasn't the whole truth. There was something else. Something I had locked away even from myself. Something only she remembered. That's when I realized. The voices in the hull, they weren't just memories. They were witnesses. And they were waiting for me to admit it, to say the thing I had never said, to say why I really sailed that night and what I really did. When the lightning struck the mast, when Logan went below and never returned, when the screams became gurgles and the gurgles became silence, I hadn't told the full story. Not even here. Not yet. But I will. I have to. Because the voices are growing louder, and the ship is starting to listen. I told myself it wasn't my fault. Storms come and go. Men die at sea. Captains make hard decisions. That's what I whispered to myself in the days before the whispering began, before the Marrow Gale turned from ship to sarcophagus. But here, in this dead water where memory refuses to fade, I'm forced to remember it all. And the truth is this: they didn't just die in the storm. They died because of me. It was after midnight when the wind changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in pressure, a murmur along the sails, like the ocean had inhaled and held its breath. The kind of shift only a captain feels in his bones. I stood alone at the helm. Logan had vanished hours earlier. The fog had grown so thick the bow disappeared entirely, like we were sailing through a dream that refused to end. I heard the first scream around 117A. It came from the lower deck, a sharp cry, cut short, not panic, surprise, then silence, then another, and another. I called out, no answer. I grabbed a lantern and descended into the belly of the ship. I remember the smell, salt, copper, oil. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, like space itself had warped, and along the walls, handprints, dozens, all pointing upward. I found Riley at the end of the galley, back arched, eyes wide. His mouth was open, lips twitching, but no sound came out, just bubbles, bubbles, in open air. Then he collapsed. His chest never rose again. That's when I felt it, the shift, not just in the wind, not just in the hull, but in time itself. We had entered something else. The storm didn't descend upon us. We sailed into it willingly. I scrambled to the main deck. Rain was falling now, sideways, hot and heavy, like the sky was bleeding. I saw Red next, clinging to the rigging, eyes closed, whispering something over and over. I climbed up to reach him. "Red, get down! Secure the sails!" He didn't move, just whispered. "She's under us." I saw her eyes. "Who?" I shouted. He looked at me then, truly looked, and for a second, I swear, it wasn't Red. His eyes were black, no whites, like the sea had filled them from within. He smiled. "She asked who should go first." Then he let go, just released. No scream, No flailing. The fog swallowed him before he hit the water. I wanted to believe it was the wind, or a slip, or madness. But I knew she had chosen him. By Tumakam, I had lost 7 men. No lightning, no waves, just disappearance, collapse, whispered names, and all the while, the ship moved forward. No sails, no current, no anchor. It drifted, as if drawn toward something. I tried to turn back, took the wheel, yanked it hard, but the Marrow Gale didn't respond. The helm spun freely, like the wheel of a toy. The rudder was gone, not broken, not jammed, gone. I looked down, and there it was again, that same woman, standing in the water beside the ship. She wasn't treading. She stood. The ocean didn't reach her waist and her eyes. They were like holes punched through the fog, ancient and endless. She lifted one hand and pointed, not at the sea, at me. Then came the sound, not thunder, not wind, a heartbeat, one massive, slow thump that rattled the beams. Then another. It was coming from beneath. The ship shuddered. Cracks spread along the deck. Salt water hissed up through the seams like steam. The crew began screaming. Some jumped, some knelt, some begged. I didn't move. I couldn't, because I remembered. That wasn't the first time I'd heard that heartbeat. I had heard it once before, 2 years earlier. A smuggling trip off the coast of Iceland. Weather was brutal. We drifted too close to an uncharted trench. The sea boiled. A sailor named Fenwick, veteran, hardened, fearless, started convulsing mid-watch. He screamed, "It sees me! It sees me!" Then he dropped dead. The crew passed it off as exposure, cold madness. But that night, I had dreams of a woman in the deep, whispering promises of safe passage. If only I'd bring her back something real. I didn't understand then, but now I know. That was the first offer, the one I never answered. So she waited. And when I signed the charter for Blackport, when I agreed to Gray's conditions and gave up my crew in all but word, she came to collect. The final act was Logan. He reappeared at 2:37 a.m., dragging a harpoon, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut with thread made of kelp. He stumbled toward me on the main deck. I screamed his name. He dropped the harpoon and fell to his knees. And then, slowly, he opened his mouth, not by cutting the stitches, by ripping them apart. Blood poured out. He whispered, "Only you can end it, but you must feed her, or she'll never stop. Elias, please." He looked up at me, eyes pleading. "Give her you." Then he leapt overboard. I didn't follow. I didn't throw a rope. I just stood there, frozen, coward, captain. The sea swallowed him whole, and the heartbeat stopped. The fog retreated. The ship floated. By morning, I was alone. All 42 were gone. No wreckage, no blood, just silence, and a whisper in the wind. You kept the truth, so now you keep me. That's why I'm still here. Not dead, not alive, just held until I confess, until I offer what she truly wants. And that's what I'm beginning to fear. Not that she wants my soul, not that she wants my death, but that she wants me to remember what I really did. Because there's one more piece to this story I've never spoken aloud, and once I do, there will be no turning back. There are names that open doors, and there are names that shatter them. I used to think the sea was a wilderness, vast, violent, but without intention. Now I know better. Now I know it listens. It waits. It remembers every name whispered in fear, every prayer offered too late, every curse spat at the edge of drowning breath, and some names it keeps I found it carved into the mast. Not by me, not by any crewman I knew, but it was there, scrawled in a language older than the waves, etched so deeply that even the fire I once set to the ship's logbook couldn't touch it. A single word, no letters I recognized, no alphabet I'd ever seen, but I understood it, not with my mind, with something deeper, a knowing that didn't feel like discovery. It felt like remembering. I said it aloud once, and the sea stirred, not violently, not immediately, but I felt the shift. The temperature dropped, the boards moaned, the air around me thickened, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. She heard me, and for the first time, I heard her speak clearly, not in dreams, not in whispers, but inside my chest, where my heart used to be. You spoke what should remain drowned. Now you must carry it. I collapsed to the floor of the cabin. My mouth bled, my ears rang, and when I looked up, the mirrors had fogged from within. From within, that's when I knew. I had invited her into me. I clawed at the walls, ripping up boards, searching for something, anything, a journal, a record, a warning, and I found it. Not in my handwriting, but in Logan's. Tucked between the pages of an old maritime almanac was a single sheet of parchment, old, brittle, smelling of mildew and brine. His scrawl read, "She is not a myth. She is not a legend. She is a god who forgot what love was and drowned herself in sorrow. The men called her Bride of the Depths. But she was never a bride. She was a mother." That last line shook me. I don't know why. Maybe it was how he wrote it, not with fear, but with grief. And below it, a final sentence, scrawled hurriedly, almost torn into the paper. Her name was never meant to be spoken. And yet, I had given voice to the void. After that, everything changed. The ship no longer creaked, it sighed. The fog no longer rolled, it reached. The ocean no longer reflected the stars. It reflected me, but not as I was, as I would become. There were moments, slivers of time, when I caught my own face in broken glass, or the warped metal of a lantern, and what I saw was no longer Elias Carron. My eyes were black, my lips blue, my teeth sharpened, and behind me, always behind me, was her, not fully formed, not completely visible, but present, a veil, a crown made of coral and rope, fingers like bone, and a smile that said, "You've always been mine." I began to dream in voices, not mine, but theirs, men I'd never met, sailors from centuries ago. Their stories flowed through me in flashes. A shipwreck in 1731 off the Orkney coast. Another in 1806, swallowed whole beneath a blood moon. A whaling vessel in 1894 whose crew slit their own throats in unison after carving her name into the sails. She'd been calling for generations, and each time she marked a captain. Each time she whispered just enough to nudge him toward betrayal, not overt, not murder, but negligence. Ambition, desperation, pride, the oldest sins of the sea. They say drowning is peaceful, that after the panic, there is calm. But this is eternal panic. I began hearing Logan again, not in the hull, not in dreams, inside me. His voice fused with mine. We shared thoughts, memories, guilt, and through it, I understood. He had tried to resist her. He'd heard her name years before. Back when we took a job smuggling cursed relics through Scandinavian waters. A box, unmarked, humming with cold. He never told me what he saw when he opened it. Only that he began hearing the tide when there was no sea. That was the first mark. She touched him then, but she chose me. Because I was the one who would deny the storm, who would silence the warnings, who would sacrifice my crew on the altar of obligation and fear. And now, as punishment, I must carry her, speak for her, spread her memory. That is the nature of the curse. She does not kill the captain. She makes him remember, forever. That's why I'm telling you this, because the more I speak her truth, the clearer she becomes. And the clearer she becomes, the closer she draws to you. Don't look behind you. Not yet. Wait. You'll know when she's near. When the lights flicker for no reason. When the pipes hum in the walls. When your reflection looks back just a little too slowly. She is memory. She is mourning. She is the ocean's orphan. The child no God would claim. And the mother who birthed herself from grief. And now, she wears my name like an anchor. She calls to the living through the lips of the dead. She sings to you when you sleep. And if you ever say her name, even once, you will see the Marrow Gale, drifting through the fog, waiting, because her vessel cannot be destroyed, only inherited. It began with the bells, not the ones we rang. No, those were long, rusted, and silent. These bells were inside the ship, inside the fog, inside me, and they rang in reverse. At first, I thought it was a trick of memory, an echo, perhaps, some fragment of sound bouncing off the walls of madness. But the second night it happened, I felt it in my bones. The chime didn't clang, it unclanged, a sound being sucked back into silence, like it regretted ever existing. And every time the bell rang backward, time shifted, not in great cinematic ways. There were no flashbacks, no rewinds, but things moved. Ropes that had been coiled were suddenly taut. A door I'd opened was now locked. Blood that had dried reappeared wet and warm. And worst of all, men who had died stood again at their stations. Not fully there, flickering, semi-solid, but moving with purpose, eyes empty, faces caught in the exact moment before death. Red, tying a knot. Caleb, checking the compass. Logan, staring straight at me. Not with hate, not with forgiveness, just waiting. They were trapped in a loop, and somehow, the backward bells kept pulling them back. I thought it was punishment. Now I believe it's invitation, a chance. Slim, impossible, to redo what was done. Or maybe that's just another part of the curse. Hope. There was one moment, brief, surreal, where I felt time open. I walked below deck, following the sound of a bell that seemed to toll from nowhere and everywhere. As I passed the galley, I saw myself, not a reflection, not a memory, me, alive. Sitting at the table, drinking black tea, scribbling something in the logbook. I watched as my younger self paused, looked up, and whispered, "Don't sail." Then, he vanished. The cup fell, shattering on the floor. I reached for the logbook, but the page was blank. I'm not sure if I broke through time, or if time broke through me. The ship no longer abides by rules. The Marrow Gale is a maze now, corridors shifting, stairs curving back to where they began. I climb one level only to return to the same hallway from a different decade. Sometimes I see the ship as it was, bustling, warm, real. Other times, I see it as it is, a rotting carcass swallowed by fog and guilt. But the bells ring backward like a clock counting down to nothingness. I tried to ignore them, tried stuffing cotton in my ears, tried humming louder, but they found new ways in. I began dreaming in reverse, waking up before I went to sleep, bleeding before I was wounded, apologizing before I knew what I'd done. Reality, like the sea, started to loop, swell, collapse, and then came the table. It was in the captain's quarters. A mahogany piece, bolted to the floor. It hadn't moved in years. But one night, I returned and found it covered in objects, items I hadn't seen in decades. My father's broken compass, a rusted harpoon, Sarah's wedding ring, a single boot, still damp. My childhood Bible, half burned. The ship's ledger from the day of the storm. All of it spread out before me, laid like evidence. And in the center, an hourglass filled with seawater, the sand grains replaced by what looked like teeth, human teeth. Each bell that rang backward pulled a few more to the bottom. Time, literally bleeding out. I reached for the ledger, and when I opened it, the words didn't make sense. Not at first. They were names. Names I didn't recognize. But then I realized these weren't crew. These were captains. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Dates beside them. Stretching back centuries. And next to each, a single phrase scrawled in red ink. She offered, and beside my name, Elias Carron, there was nothing, no phrase, just a blank space, still waiting. Because I hadn't chosen yet, or maybe I had refused too long, and now she wanted more. I slammed the book shut. That's when I heard the voice again. Not a whisper, not a scream, a lullaby, soft, wet, sung in a language I didn't understand but somehow knew. It rose from beneath the floorboards, from the fog that crept under doors, from the mouths of the dead when they flickered into being. And it said one thing, over and over. You can reverse the tide, but only through blood. I staggered back. The hourglass tipped over. The seawater spread like veins across the table, and the bells tolled again. Backward, slower, heavier. Reality cracked. The ship buckled, and the voice grew louder. You can go back. You can undo the night. You can bring them home. But you must give me a name. I knew what she meant. She wanted a soul. One final offering. But not just any man. Someone willing. Someone who knew why. Someone whose blood would stitch time like a wound, sealing past and present with guilt and love. The name burned behind my teeth before I said it, and I hated myself for thinking it. Logan. Because Logan had already spoken to her. Because Logan had heard her before any of us. Because he wanted redemption. And part of me, the weakest, cruelest part, believed he'd understand. The ship groaned. The air thickened. The fog coiled. I opened my mouth. But before I could say the name, the bell stopped. A single chime. Forward. Clear. Sharp. Real. The ship stilled. And in that frozen moment, I heard my own voice, calling from somewhere deep within the vessel. Don't. It wasn't a memory. It was me. From a different moment. A different version. Maybe one who chose differently. Maybe one who hadn't yet failed. And in that sound, in that impossible echo from another path, I found a thread, a choice. I didn't have to give a name. Not yet. But the clock is still ticking. The bells are still tolling. And I know, if I wait too long, she will take someone anyway. Someone innocent. Someone close. And this time, there will be no going back. They didn't knock. They didn't groan or shriek like the ghosts from old tales. They simply stood there, one by one. The crew I lost? No. The crew I delivered returned. It was just past what should have been dawn. But the sun hadn't risen in weeks, maybe longer. Time had stopped trying to disguise itself. There was only gray fog, gray sea, gray thought. I opened the door to the captain's quarters and saw them lining the hallway. 42 men, every face accounted for, and every face watching me. Not angry, not sad, just quiet, as if they'd been waiting. They weren't translucent. Not ghostly, not flickering like they had before. They were solid, tangible, real, but not alive. Their skin was grayed, lips blue, clothing damp as if they'd just stepped from the water. Red still had rope burns on his neck. Caleb's right eye was gone, replaced by a blackened hollow. Logan stood at the center, harpoon in hand, not threatening, just present. I stepped back. No one moved. No one blinked. And then, all at once, they began to speak, but not in unison. Each voice, layered, jagged, echoing from within the hull, spoke a single phrase, over and over, building into a wall of noise. Do you remember who we were? Do you remember what we gave you? Do you remember what you took? It wasn't a chant. It was a cross-examination. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. Then Red stepped forward. His mouth opened too wide, cracking at the edges. Salt water spilled from his lips. You said we'd be safe. Another voice, Thomas, the old cook, stepped from behind him. You said it was a quick haul. Another. You said the storm was just a rumor. You said you had no choice. Logan stepped forward last, and his voice split me in half. What did you say to her? Everything went still. The others faded, not vanished, just waited, like ghosts slipping behind curtains, watching from just out of sight. It was just Logan and I, standing in the heart of the ship, and I knew exactly what he meant. Not Sarah, not the sea, her. The entity in the fog, the drowned goddess, the memory made flesh. I turned away. He grabbed my shoulder. What did you offer, Elias? My jaw clenched. I didn't want to say it, because if I said it, it would be true. And if it were true, I was worse than a coward, worse than a fool. I was a thief of souls. I looked him in the eye, those sunken, dead eyes filled with questions and quiet betrayal, and I told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. She came to me in dreams, before the voyage, before Blackport. She asked for passage. She promised safety, wealth, escape. And I said yes. I thought she meant me. I didn't realize. Logan interrupted. You did. He said it with no venom, no hatred, just certainty. Because of course I knew. Of course I had sensed what it was. The way the fog watched me. The way the water had whispered before the voyage. The way I had stopped praying months before the storm. I knew, but I told myself the lie that all damn men tell. Just this once. It'll be fine. No one needs to know. Now they all knew. Logan reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it in my hands. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Inside was the ship's bell striker. I hadn't seen it in weeks. I thought it was lost. He pointed upward, toward the bell that hung above the crow's nest. It had stopped ringing long ago. If you want to speak to her, Logan said, you need to wake the ship. Not the ghost version, the real one. The one that remembers everything. The one before, I didn't understand. Not fully, but I knew what I had to do. I climbed. Each rung of the mast felt heavier than the last. The fog parted above, revealing the crow's nest like a forgotten altar. And the bell, silent, dusted with ash and salt, waited. I gripped the striker, and I rang it. Once. The sound that followed wasn't a clang. It was a pulse, a heartbeat. The ship itself exhaled. The deck beneath groaned. The fog peeled back like dead skin. And in that instant, I remembered not just what I had done, but who they had been. Each man, each life I stole, came flooding back. Red had a brother he was sending money to. Caleb had just proposed before the voyage. Thomas was 3 days from retirement. And Logan had trusted me. That trust was a gift, and I had broken it. That was the real curse. Not the goddess, not the storm, the knowledge. The unbearable weight of what I chose not to stop. I fell to my knees in the crow's nest, the bell still trembling from the strike. And then I heard her, clearly, inside me, around me. Will you finish what you began? Will you give me what you owe? Or will you drown in knowing? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know yet. I only knew one thing. The dead remember everything. And now, so did I. Ships aren't meant to have basements. That's the first thing you need to understand. A keel is a spine. The bottom of a ship, solid, final, the end of the descent. There is no beneath it. And yet, there I was, staring at a rusted iron hatch bolted to the floor of the bilge. A place that should have been packed with brine and rot, now dry, cold, and waiting. It wasn't there before, at least not in my time. But this ship has become more than wood and sail. It's a memory palace, a coffin of choices, a living architecture shaped by guilt and godless things. And it had grown a door for me, a door I had to open. The striker from the bell was still in my hand. It had grown warm, pulsing faintly like a living organ. I used it to knock. Once, the hatch groaned. Rust screamed. Bolts popped free like teeth, and down I went. The ladder descended far too long, deeper than any ship could reach. Past the hull, past the realm of logic, down into a darkness that was not black, but blue. A crushing, liquid blue, the color of dreams you can't wake from. I stepped off the final rung into something like a chamber. The walls pulsed like lungs. The air was wet, but not from water, from presence. The kind of humidity that made your thoughts damp. And in the center of the room was the eye. It didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered, massive, lidless, suspended in nothing. It looked like the eye of a whale, but with no warmth, no animal reason, just endless iris, a black pool with shifting constellations inside. And it was open, staring at me. I tried to speak, my mouth filled with salt, my teeth buzzed. The walls around me shifted, pulsed, revealed carvings, not scratched, but grown into the flesh of the space. I saw faces, mine, Logan's, the crew, but not how they died, how they chose. Each carving a frozen decision. The moment I ignored the forecast, the second I dismissed Logan's warning, the handshake with Malcolm Gray, every hinge of damnation preserved like fossils in cathedral walls. I fell to my knees. I didn't cry. Crying requires hope. Instead, I reached toward the eye, and it spoke. Not in words, in knowing. It showed me. A sea older than the world, a goddess, nameless and abandoned, cast into the depths by her own kin, not for malice, not for evil, but because her sorrow was too vast, her mourning too contagious. Her grief bent oceans, and when she sank, the deep cracked open. She became the first current, the first storm, the first curse. And now, after eons of silence, she had chosen to feel again. Through me, through memory, through remorse. That's what she feeds on. Not blood, not flesh, but the rot of the heart. She doesn't haunt murderers. She haunts the guilty, because guilt is eternal. And she is the sea that refuses to forget. The eye drew closer, still unblinking. Do you want peace? It pulsed. I didn't answer. Do you want to undo what was done? My lips trembled. Say the name. I shook my head, not because I was brave, but because I was finally honest. I can't undo it, I said. I made the call. They followed me. And they died. Because of me. The eye paused. A long, terrible stillness. Then the chamber brightened. Faintly, like a distant sun breaking through fathoms of ice. The carving shifted. No longer frozen moments of doom, but of choice. I saw Logan stepping between the crew in a shadow I hadn't remembered. I saw Red tossing a lifeline toward the water, not knowing it was already too late. I saw myself, hesitating. Just before the storm, I could have turned back. The map was open. The signs were there, but I didn't. And the sea remembered. The eye pulsed again. You cannot undo, but you can carry. You can take them with you. I didn't understand. What do you mean? A new door opened behind the eye. Inside, 42 shadows, each glowing faintly, each bearing a face I knew. They weren't screaming. They weren't angry. They were waiting. The eye dimmed. The presence whispered, "Take them home, one by one, and I will rest." My chest tightened. This was the price. Not my death, not punishment, but ferrying them, soul by soul, from this place. I was to become the shepherd of the drowned. No redemption, no erasure, only witness. And I accepted. Because what else was there? I stepped into the chamber. They followed. Logan last. He paused beside me. He didn't speak, just nodded once. And then we began the ascent, back toward the ship, back toward the world. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, the fog thinned. It started whispering again the moment I climbed above deck. Not the ship, not the wind, the sea. It knows my name now, not just Elias, not just Carron, but the full truth of me. Every syllable I ever buried, every secret I fed to the fog, and it speaks them back to me in 100 stolen voices. Sarah's, my father's, Logan's, my own. You'll fail them. You've always failed them. They died calling for you, and you never answered. I gripped the railing to steady myself. Though there was no storm, the ocean around the Marrow Gale was smooth now, impossibly so. Not calm, not serene, but glass-like, dead. And beneath that glass, I saw them, the 42 souls, not drifting, not drowning, but waiting, like passengers at a port that had never existed before this moment. Their faces stared up at me from below the waterline, clear, expressionless, like they were daring me to start. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know how. The goddess who wore the drowned mother hadn't given me a ritual, no chance, no tools, no map, just a mandate. Take them home. I didn't even know what home meant anymore. For some, it might be a place, a memory, a forgiveness. For others, it might be confession. And for at least one, it might mean confrontation. I rang the bell. One clear note, not backward, not distorted, just one chime, honest and sharp. The fog parted, slightly, and the first soul stepped forward. Red. He climbed the rope ladder as if it had never broken. His boots didn't echo. His clothes dripped salt water that never hit the deck. He looked younger somehow. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked everything. I nodded, and I remembered for him. I remembered how he joined the crew on a dare, thinking the sea was just another place to get lost. I remembered how he joked through the worst weather, sang old folk songs when everyone else grew too quiet. I remembered how he had no one waiting on shore, just the horizon and the thrill of not being known. He had been searching for freedom, and I had turned it into a cage. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I should have told you to go home. His mouth didn't move, but he smiled, just slightly. And then he was gone, not vanished, not pulled, just released. The sea accepted him like breath into lungs. I looked down, and his reflection was gone. One down, 41 to go. That was when the sea spoke again, but softer now, coaxing, seductive. You could keep them. You could build a kingdom of the lost. You know their names, their sins, their weaknesses. Why let them go when you could be worshipped? I turned away, but the voice followed. You were always meant to lead them. You wear guilt like a crown. Let it become power. The next soul climbed aboard. Caleb. His missing eye glistened with something deeper than sorrow. Innocence stolen. I remembered the moment he died. He had come to me with a question, a small one. He wanted to know if the course was still safe, if I had checked the barometer again. I lied. I told him everything was fine, because I didn't want the crew to panic, because I didn't want to be questioned, because I didn't want to face the numbers. He had nodded, trusted me, and 30 minutes later, he was gone. I knelt before him. You asked, I answered wrong. Not because I didn't know, but because I did. His gaze didn't flinch, and then, like red, he faded. The water below accepted him. The sea did not speak this time, but I could feel it watching, like a god losing grip on its prize. One by one, the souls came. Thomas, Ellie, Brewer, Holloway, Sam, each with a weight, each with a truth I hadn't spoken aloud since their deaths. And with each release, the sea changed. The surface grew darker, the fog grew louder, and the voice grew sharper. You're weakening the veil. You're unraveling her design. Do you know what happens when a soul refuses to obey? Ask yourself why she hasn't stopped you. I paused. That's when the thought struck. Why hadn't she stopped me? Why open the chamber? Why show me the eye? Why allow this exodus? Unless this was her plan, unless the punishment wasn't just death or memory, but the burden of release. Because this hurts more than drowning. This is tearing pieces from my chest with every goodbye. And there are still more. The next soul climbed aboard. Logan. I couldn't move. He stood across from me, silent, soaked, harpoon in hand. He looked more alive than dead, more human than any of the others. He always was the best of us. His eyes locked with mine, and I broke. I used you, I whispered. You saw it. You tried to warn me. And I pushed you aside. You knew the sea was speaking, and I said you were crazy. He didn't interrupt. He didn't comfort, just listened, like he always had. And then, he did something no one else did. He spoke. I forgave you long ago, but you haven't. That shattered me. More than any storm, more than any scream. I nodded. No, I said, I haven't. Because if I forgive myself, I'm afraid I'll forget you. He smiled. Then carry us. Not the guilt, just us. And then, for the first time since the ship vanished, I cried. I don't know how long, but when I opened my eyes, Logan was gone. The water was still. The sea said nothing. Only 12 remained. 12 stories. 12 truths. And after them, only me and her. I once believed the fog was just a symptom, the visible breath of something ancient hiding beneath the surface. A veil, a curse, but fog is never neutral. It covers, it edits, it lies, and it had been lying to me from the beginning. I realized this after the 12th soul passed. Her name was Clara, barely 20, one of the cooks. She wasn't even on the manifest. Joined the crew late, after a fight with her family. Quiet, always humming. She died trying to help the injured. Not running, not hiding, just helping. When I released her, the fog did something strange. It recoiled, not like a beast in pain, but like something caught. And for the first time, I saw something on the horizon, a shape I hadn't noticed before. Not land, not another ship, but a structure, just barely visible through the shifting mist. An outline of a tower, tall, thin, crooked like a finger beckoning from the void. It shouldn't be there. There was nothing on our route. We were in deep water, charted ocean, no lighthouses, watching no shoals, nothing. And yet, the shape didn't move with the fog. It stayed, fixed, anchored, like it had always been there, just hidden. I turned to the bell, struck it once. The fog flinched again, and this time it peeled back, just slightly, enough to show the base of the tower. It wasn't built from stone or metal. It was made of mass, ship mass, hundreds of them, shattered, bound together, rising like bones toward the sky, and the banners fluttering near the top, familiar, too familiar. The sigil of Blackport Shipping Company, and beneath it, an older symbol, a ring of rope with a single black eye at the center. I had seen that symbol once before, in Malcolm Gray's office, etched onto the clasp of the envelope that held our contract. My chest went still. I knew the sea had claimed us, but someone had invited her. I stumbled back into the captain's quarters, flung open the logbook. Pages fluttered in protest, soaked, blistered, some fused together by brine. But I found it. The cargo manifest, a single entry, hastily written, black ink, thicker than the rest. Crate, Sherrozer 391, ecclesiastical relic, do not open. I had never seen it loaded, never signed for it. But the name, my blood turned cold. I had heard that name before, back in the Icelandic waters. 2 years prior, Logan and I were transporting a locked crate, same designation, same symbol. The one he later said had spoken to him. It wasn't a one-time job. It was a delivery route, a system, ships selected, captains coerced, relics moved, all tied to that symbol, the black eye in the rope. I remembered asking Gray what it meant once. He'd smiled and said, tradition, just a harmless seal, maritime folklore. But nothing about this was harmless. Nothing about this was folklore. The shipping company had been trafficking artifacts tied to the drowned mother. Maybe not knowingly, maybe not directly, but someone, somewhere in the chain, knew what they were doing, and I had helped them, not once, but twice. I stumbled back above deck, chest heaving. The tower on the horizon glowed faintly now, a sickly blue, like lanterns lit by ghosts. And the fog, it had changed again. It no longer whispered my name. It whispered hers, the name I had said only once, the one I wasn't supposed to know, the one the eye had burned into my bones. I won't say it again, but she heard it, and so did they. The remaining crew, the ones not yet released, now stood along the deck, silent, still, watching. They had known too, somehow, in death. They had seen the truth, and they were waiting for me to admit it, to say that this wasn't just misjudgment, not just pride, not just bad weather. It was a ritual, one I didn't know I was part of, but one I had still performed. I walked the length of the ship, soul by soul, voice shaking. I spoke their truths. Not just about their deaths, but about their use. Each had been chosen, not because they were weak, but because they were forgettable. Young, old, poor, unconnected. No family to investigate, no reporters to ask questions, disposables. And I had signed their permission slips. Even if I didn't know it, I never asked. Because when the contract came in, I was desperate, and desperate men don't read the fine print. They just look at the dollar sign and pray to gods that aren't listening. But this God, she was always listening. She heard me. And when I said yes, she opened the fog, not to kill us, but to consume us. Because the relic in the cargo hold, the ecclesiastical artifact, wasn't meant to be delivered. It was meant to be opened at sea. That's what the fog tried to hide. That's what Logan tried to stop. That's why the bells rang backward, to undo what had been done. I turned to the last souls still aboard. Only 5 left now. And they looked different. Not damaged, not accusing, but hopeful. Because now they knew I saw it. Now they knew I was ready to do what they couldn't, speak the truth, bury the past, and face what waited inside that crate. I nodded once, turned toward the hold, and began the descent, because I still hadn't seen it. The thing inside, the thing I had unknowingly delivered, twice, but now, finally, I would open the box and face the heart of the curse. There are doors you open with keys, and there are doors you open with blood. The hold was colder than it had ever been. Not the wet chill of seawater or mist. This was deeper, older, a cold that moved inside your bones. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with presence. The crate was still there. Crate Yozorn 391. Same dimensions, same black iron bindings, same rope-tied seal pressed with the mark, a noose formed in a perfect circle, and a single staring eye. I approached slowly. Every footstep echoed louder than the last, as if the ship itself were growing more alert, watching, holding its breath. The final 5 souls stood behind me, Logan at the center. They said nothing. They didn't need to. This was what they were waiting for. This was the heart, the hinge, the rot. I knelt beside the crate. It pulsed, barely perceptible, like a second heartbeat beneath the wood. Not mechanical, not magical, biological. I reached for the rope. My hands trembled. The moment my fingers touched the seal, a sound cracked through the hold, low, resonant, like a whale song inverted and turned into a scream. The walls rippled, time lurched, and suddenly, I was somewhere else, not gone, not dreaming, but inside the memory of the crate itself. I stood in a desert, bleached white, bone-colored dunes stretched across the horizon. The sky was black ocean, upside down, filled with inverted stars that dripped downward like tears. And in front of me, the mother, not a ghost, not a goddess, a shape of grief given flesh. She had no face, only the suggestion of one, a veil of kelp, a crown of driftwood. Her fingers curled backward like broken masts, but what chilled me was her silence. She didn't demand, she didn't rage, she mourned. I understood, without speaking, that this was a place of remembering, and she would show me everything. I saw the first offering, centuries ago, a priest, a storm, a town on the verge of collapse. He prayed not for salvation, but for sacrifice. He offered 7 souls, bound and drowned. The sea receded, the crops returned, the town thrived. And the priest, he became the first captain, the first deliverer. A legacy began. Over the years, the offering evolved, hidden in trade, slipped into shipments, contracts written in half-truths and financial chains. And always the crate, not opened, not touched, just transported from one sea to another, from one greedy hand to the next, until it found me. The vision snapped. I was back in the hold, still on my knees. The rope around the crate had come undone. The seal had burned away, not melted, not torn, but evaporated, like it was never meant to last this long. The lid of the crate rose slightly, hissing, no hands, no hinge, just gravity in reverse. Inside, water, but not liquid. A column of suspended seawater, swirling in impossible patterns. And at its center, a fetal form, small, curled, sleeping. Her, a younger version, trapped in her own grief. A memory of pain preserved in salt. Her eyes were closed, but I knew, if they opened, I would not survive it. The ship groaned. Fog poured into the hold. The air grew thick with names, not shouted, not spoken, but felt. Every name I had betrayed. Every soul still echoing in the space between memory and mercy. Logan stepped forward. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "We finish this," I nodded. Then reached into the crate. The moment my fingers touched the column, it collapsed. Water slammed outward, but didn't splash. It hung, suspended. Droplets holding faces, screams, moments of death frozen mid-sentence. Each one passed through me. Each one re-broke my spine. Each one whispered, "Let me go." And then she opened her eyes. Not rage, not hunger. Recognition. She knew me, not by name, not by face, by regret. She floated upward, not moving her limbs, just rising, pulled by something deeper than force. Her mouth opened, and from it spilled a wave of memories that were not mine. I saw her lose her children, one by one, to war, to plague, to tides. I saw her beg the sea to bring them back, and when it refused, she drowned herself. But she did not die. She became the echo of every mother whose prayers went unanswered. She became the salt in every graveyard tide. She became the grief of the ocean, and she was tired. So tired. "I never wanted worship," she whispered inside my head. "I only wanted to be remembered." I understood that the relic wasn't a weapon, it wasn't meant to curse or kill. It was a mourning shrine, and men like Gray had turned it into currency. I stepped back, looked around. All 5 remaining crew now surrounded the crate, one by one. They reached forward, touched the swirling mist, and one by one, they disappeared, not erased, lifted. The fog stilled, the ship creaked. The hold became quiet, the crate empty. And her, she was gone, not banished, just free. For the first time in all these twisted years, she had been seen, heard, and remembered with truth. I collapsed to the floor, salt on my lips, tears on my cheeks. Logan knelt beside me, smiled, faded. Now, only one soul remained, mine, and the sea was waiting. The silence was unbearable, not peaceful, not clean. It was the kind of silence that presses against your skin, waiting to see what you'll do next. The Marrow Gale had stopped creaking. The wind had died. Even the sea, once constant in its whispers, its hunger, its mourning, had gone still, and I was alone. For the first time since the voyage began, I stood truly, entirely, alone. I should have felt relief, maybe even redemption. But instead, I felt watched. Not by her. She was gone. I knew that in my bones. The weight of her gaze, of her grief, had lifted, but something else remained. Something she left behind. I moved through the ship like a man walking through the ruins of a home he barely remembers building. Every door was open now. Every corridor straightened. The impossible loops, the Escher-like spirals of space, had resolved into ordinary passageways. But the ordinary now felt wrong. Like a stage set after the actors have left. Props still in place, the spotlight slowly fading. I reached the upper deck. The fog had cleared completely. Above me was a sky I no longer trusted. Blue, gentle, streaked with morning light that felt mocking. I hadn't seen daylight in weeks, or had it been years. The tower of masts on the horizon, the structure I'd seen through the fog, was gone now. So was the sea's voice. But in its place, I heard something new, a heartbeat, faint, rhythmic, familiar, but no longer threatening. I followed it. It led me to the captain's quarters, where it all began, where I made the decisions that doomed them, where I denied the weather, where I signed the manifest, where I lied to myself and called it duty. The heartbeat grew louder, not from beneath, not from above, from inside the cabin itself. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a hallucination, but I've learned that the most unbelievable things on this ship are the only things that are real. It was a child's cradle, old, splintered, rocking gently though the floor was still. There was something inside it, not moving, not crying, just breathing. I stepped closer, and in that moment, I knew. This was what she left behind. Not vengeance, not wrath, not guilt. Memory. I peered into the cradle and saw my own face, but younger, much younger, maybe 6 or 7, sleeping, breathing, alive. My throat closed. I staggered backward, tried to rationalize it, tried to find symbols, metaphors, meanings, but the truth was simple. She had returned to me a piece of myself, the part I lost long before the Marrow Gale, the part that believed the sea was beautiful, that ships brought freedom, that men followed captains because captains cared. Somewhere along the way, I had buried that child in responsibility, fear, and pride. And now, here he was, breathing, waiting. I knelt beside the cradle, touched his cheek. It was warm, real. And as I touched him, memories I'd forgotten came flooding back. Not horrors, joy. The first time I stood at the helm beside my father, the sound of my mother singing while mending sails, the feel of the salt wind in my teeth, before the contracts and blood, before I believed everything had to hurt to matter. I wept, not from shame, from remembrance. And I heard her voice one last time, faint, like a ripple far away. I took everything that wasn't yours and gave back what always was. Now choose. I looked up. The horizon was open. No fog, no storm. Land, maybe not to, or not. I had no compass, no map, no crew, just myself. Or the version of myself that could still believe again, could still sail, not for profit or punishment, but for something truer. The cradle rocked gently. The child inside stirred, yawned, and I understood what she meant. My punishment was over. But my choice had just begun. I could stay, let the ship rot, let the story fade into myth, or I could take the helm, with no destination, no redemption to chase, just the weight of memory, and a vow to remember them all. I stood, lifted the cradle gently, carried it above deck. The wheel waited, still, patient. I stepped behind it, hands resting lightly. The air changed, not colder, not darker, just awake, as if the ship had been sleeping, waiting for a captain who knew not to command, but to listen. The sails caught a breeze, a real one, and the Marrow Gale began to move, not west, not east, just forward. I looked out across the water, and for a moment, just one, I saw them, all 42, standing on the waves, smiling, and then gone, but not lost, carried, always. The sea was different now, still wide, still deep, still unknowable, but no longer malicious, no longer filled with the weight of the dead. The air didn't press down like a curse. The sails no longer screamed when the wind filled them. The Marrow Gale moved smoothly, like she had been waiting all this time to sail free. And for the first time in a very long time, so had I. I didn't steer her. There was no map, no compass, no harbor to aim for. I simply stood behind the wheel and let the ship go where it needed to. The child slept in the cradle beside me, silent, peaceful, and I knew by now it wasn't truly a child. It was something far more dangerous. It was hope. Hope made flesh. Hope restored. Hope after the storm. For hours, maybe days, we sailed. The sky above shifted in strange patterns. No sun, no moon, but light, like dawn was always just about to break. Beneath the surface of the water, shapes moved, not threatening, not human. They watched the ship with eyes the color of ancient memory. They didn't follow. They escorted. The sea was no longer a predator. It had become a path. The voices were gone. No whispers in the fog. No calls from the deep. No screams from the hull. Just the sound of wood and wind, rope and water. I thought I would be afraid of silence, but this silence, it wasn't empty. It was earned. Somewhere around what should have been dusk, I saw land. Not a sharp coastline, not cliffs or harbors, just shape, distant, faint, like the memory of a place you once knew but can't quite recall. And the ship turned toward it, unbidden. The cradle stirred. The child opened its eyes. And for a split second, I didn't see my face. I saw theirs. All of them. Each man and woman I had failed. Each soul I had carried. Each voice I had silenced and then remembered. Their eyes, one by one, flickered through that tiny face. And then, only mine remained. A mirror. A chance. The ship slowed. The wind dropped to a whisper. The sea flattened once more. And there, standing on the surface of the water ahead of us, was Logan. Not as a ghost. Not as a drowned man, but as he had once been, alive, smiling. He nodded once and spoke a single word. Home. I didn't understand at first, but the cradle did. It floated upward, slowly, gently, and dissolved into light. The light spread across the ship, across the sails, across the sky. And suddenly, I wasn't standing on a deck anymore. I was everywhere. In the crow's nest, laughing with Red. In the kitchen, listening to Thomas hum. In the storm, gripping the wheel with bleeding hands. In the fog, whispering apologies no one could hear. I was living all of it again, not to suffer, not to be punished, but to bear witness, to carry it forward, to keep them from being forgotten. And then, just as quickly as it began, I was back, alone, but not lonely. The ship had anchored itself. The land was close now, a beach with black sand, trees bending in a wind I couldn't feel. I didn't need to disembark. Not yet. This wasn't a destination. It was a threshold. The Marrow Gale had completed her voyage. So had I. But before the end, there was one last thing. I reached into the cabin, opened the final drawer of my desk. Inside, the contract, the first one. The paper Malcolm Gray had slid across the table all those years ago. The deal that started it all. Still crisp, still signed. I held it in both hands. Read it again, and this time, I saw the line I'd missed. Upon completion of delivery, one soul shall remain aboard. I laughed, low, dry, almost bitter, because I understood now. It had always been me. Not the storm, not the relic, not the goddess. The final offering was the one who lived. I took the contract to the edge of the deck, tore it slowly, piece by piece, let each shred drift into the sea, not as defiance, but as closure. The water swallowed the pieces gently, without hunger, without malice, without vengeance. The sky above cleared completely. And for the first time, I saw stars, not strange, twisting constellations of ghostlight, but true stars, old, familiar. I closed my eyes, placed my hand on the wheel, and whispered, "Take me where they can hear the story," because that's what matters in the end. Not glory, not vengeance, just the truth, spoken clearly, carried carefully, like a child in a cradle or a bell on a haunted deck. If you're hearing this, it means the sea let the story go, that she trusted me enough to carry it and trusted you enough to listen. And for that, she thanks you, and so do I. The Marrow Gale drifts now, not cursed, not hunted, but remembered. That's all she ever needed. That's all any of us need, in the end, to not be erased, to not be rewritten by those who never knew the weight of our choices, to be seen and forgiven, and finally, let go. I stand here on the deck one last time. No fog, no dead, no God beneath the waves, just the hush of a ship exhaling its last breath. The stars above are still. The water is warm, and the wheel doesn't fight me anymore. The cradle is gone now. No child, no symbol, because that part of me no longer needs to be cradled. It has stood, it has steered. I spent a lifetime trying to outrun failure, but the truth is, we're all vessels. We're all creaking hulls held together by memory and forgiveness, and scars no one sees. And the sea, she doesn't want perfection, she wants truth. I once believed leadership meant never admitting you were afraid, never wavering, never confessing, but that's a myth men tell each other to protect their pride. The truth is, the bravest thing a man can do is to admit when he was wrong, to face the things he buried, to carry the weight, not as punishment, but as proof that he still feels. I remember every face now. Red's laughter, Caleb's worry, Thomas's humming from the galley, Logan's eyes the night he told me, "She's watching." They're not ghosts anymore. They're not wounds. They're stories. And stories, when told truthfully, stop being curses. They become compass stars. For others, for you. That's why I'm telling this. Not to be pitied, not to be mourned, but because I believe there is someone out there, maybe you, standing at the helm of your own storm right now. Maybe you're facing a decision that feels small, but isn't. Maybe you're about to sign something, say something, sacrifice something, and maybe in that moment, you'll hear my voice, just a whisper, a reminder. Don't forget the names. Don't forget the people. Don't forget that leadership isn't a title. It's a promise. The ship is quiet now. The last rope uncoils. The anchor, long rusted, slips free and drifts into water that no longer drags, but cradles. I close my eyes, and I let go of the wheel, not to sink, not to vanish, but to be carried, this time, not by guilt, but by the grace of having remembered every soul who ever called me captain. So if you pass by a misty shore someday, and you think you see the outline of a ship that shouldn't be there, don't be afraid. It's just me, still sailing, still telling the story, still remembering. And if you do nothing else in this life, I ask only this: remember me kindly, and remember yourself kindly, too. Because if there's one thing I've learned from the storm, the silence, the 42 souls I'll never forget, it's this: each of us is steering our own ship, and not everyone will not make mistakes, but to face them, to truly stand in front of them, name them, carry them without turning to stone, that is the real redemption. We are all the result of 1,000 storms survived, and we are all, every single one of us, worth bringing home. Not because we are perfect, but because we are trying. That is enough. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.